Welcome to session 3 of this CREST deep dive, Navigating Care Fatigue. This particular brief session is going to be simply a focus in on why do we experience care fatigue. And there are 5 particular reasons why care fatigue is the experience of those who are on the front line of people-intensive vocations and callings. Reason number 1 is it's because we care. If you didn't care, you really wouldn't need to worry about having fatigue and weariness from caring, but you care. People who are in people-intensive callings are in those callings because they actually care about people. And in that care, we then become carriers. We become the carriers of the emotions and the circumstances and sometimes the trauma of other people. We hold these people. We also, in a sense, hold some of their pain, some of the grief. And because of that, there is potentially a fatigue that comes because you cannot carry something for very long before your arms get tired. You can't carry something for very long before your legs begin to shake a little bit. And that simply speaks to the need that we need periods of rest and recovery whenever we are carrying someone or something. But we experience care fatigue because we care. Secondly, we experience care fatigue because the labor that we engage in is what is referred to as emotional labor. Now, the insight into emotional labor comes to us nearly 50 years ago now, a little less than 50 years ago. And it comes from a fascinating place. It comes from the study of airline stewardesses at the time. Arlie Hochschild did her work in 1979 in the early 80s, and she defined 2 broad types of emotion work. She said one part of emotion work is what she called evocative work. It's the evocation of emotion, in which the focus is on a desired feeling in an environment which is absent. So in care work with people, we present ourselves in such a way where we are evoking emotion, empathy and care and love. It may be that we're seeking to evoke some presence of positive attitude and perspective when you're in the presence of very negative circumstances. So it's labor to evoke emotion. There's also a second form of labor, and that is the suppression of emotion, in which the focus is on the fact that there are undesired feelings which can be present that we suppress. So you're working with people every day, and there's a lot of emotion in the room. And you know that in your professional role, there is suppression of emotion. You don't just jump into the exact mirroring of the emotion of your client, of the person, the man or woman who's in front of you, the family you're dealing with. Your role is to provide them some form of stability foundation, and so you suppress the emotion. This emotional labor insight is very valuable for those of us who are in people-intensive work. We don't realize that we do it every day. I remember my role as a pastor. When I learned this concept, I realized the degree to which I was every day, every week, I was, in a sense, acting. I was acting on the surface, and I was evoking certain emotional kind of vibe for people that, I was great and good and everything was fine, and I was seeking to put on a happy face. When I knew deep down I was struggling some days, and I really was not happy. And it was labor, it was work. I also knew at times that I would be in the presence of things where I wanted to express certain emotions, but I knew I couldn't. And so Arlie Hochschild's work with stewardesses was that she noted that she talked to stewardesses, interviewed them, that they realized every day when they went to work 2 or 3 hours in a plane, they had to evoke certain surface act, a certain way that they were happy and glad to be serving the customer. They also were in an era where the customer was always right. They had to suppress emotions with passengers who were really being total jerks, and they had to still smile. And so that surface acting went in time into what was called a deep acting, where at some deep level you lost a sense of who you were. This is part of emotional labor. And the work on emotional labor indicates that when we're not aware of this, we can lose the sense of really who we are. This is where the medium malaise comes in. And it can become deleterious to our health, emotionally, physically, because we lose touch with the real us. So we experience care fatigue because of this emotional labor. It's the nature of what our work is really all about. We're delving into the realm of emotion and feelings. And that comes very close to the issue of weariness and fatigue. Thirdly, the reason why we experience it is because we all bump against the law of limits. One of the resources we're providing for you is a piece entitled Living Without Limits, and it's the out word is crossed out, but we bump up against the law of limits, but I think sometimes we don't honor the limits. We think we can go beyond our physical limits. We think we can go beyond our emotional limits. We think we can go beyond our performance limits. We think we can go beyond our mental limits. And when we do that, it doesn't take very long before we are in overload, because we're seeking to live in a way that is contrary to how it is that we are created and who it is that we are. I think Jesus was seeking to get at this entire law of limits by saying to his disciples, in a sense, paraphrase, I appreciate the fact that your spirit is so willing, but your flesh is weak. Jesus was saying every one of us are embodied in these bone stacks that we live in. And we've got this, computer up here on top of the bone stack, and we think we can exceed limits and exceed limits and exceed limits. We can't. We can't go beyond the healthy level of resources we have and simply take on more and more load and think that we are invincible. None of us are invincible. None of us can know it all. None of us can be everywhere for all. None of us can fix it all. None of us. Not one of us. And we experience care fatigue because we bump up the law limits, but we try to be an exemption to the law of limits. We have to remind ourselves often that there's a wonderful law of limits. That's why I need to rest. That's why I need to refresh and recover. That's why I need to renew. That's why I need to practice appropriate self-care so as to be able to care well for others. The final point is because most of us carry internal messages that steer us into this place. And perhaps the internal message is just what we talked about. The internal message that I need to go beyond my past performance, and I need to do better and more than I did before. I need to go beyond my physical limits because that's what really, really good people do. I need to be able to handle more and more emotional stuff in my world because I've seen people who can do that better than I can. I need to catch up to them. Or there's an internal message that says I need to always be able to rescue people. Or I need to be able to care for people in a way that I have all the answers they need. Those are internal messages that create fatigue because they are load that we carry. So I'm going to give you opportunity. I'm going to prompt you in a little bit with your team or with a few other people to take time to think about these things and your thoughts on them, but in particular, the matter of the carrying and what we carry internally goes to a very, very important exercise of regularly asking yourself, what is it I'm carrying? Because your management and stewardship of that becomes very important in dealing with care fatigue and keeping care fatigue, in a sense, at bay. Tim O'Brien wrote a book a number of years ago entitled The Things They Carried. And it's his particular writing related to soldiers of war in the Vietnam War. And he interviewed U.S. Marines, he interviewed Viet Cong, North Vietnamese, South Vietnamese soldiers, went back to Vietnam, interviewed many of these people who were now, as he interviewed them, were now in their 50s, 60s, 70s. And he asked them a simple question: what did you carry? And he found it interesting that initially they immediately all were very quick to answer. I carried food, I carried water, gear, I carried weapons, I carried medicine. And then he said, what else did you carry? And they would then stop and think, and they would say, well, I carried pictures of my family, my wife, my kids, my mom and dad. I carried a hope that I would make it out of here alive. I carried a lot of fear. I carried my buddies. And sometimes the soldiers, the Marines and others would sort of pause, and he knew that at that point they were beginning to run out of thoughts. And then he would say, what else did you carry? Just tell me, what else did you carry? And that's when he would get to a place where there would be soldiers who would begin, tough and hardened men who would break down often and cry. And they'd say, I carried the weight of not showing I was afraid. I carried myself with a kind of poise and dignity that when I look back on it, defied reason. It was nonsensical. I carried a lot of shame and a lot of guilt over what went on in war. And it was in the third or fourth question, that level, where O'Brien said, I began to realize that those were the weightiest things. You know, I've often thought that this kind of questioning would be very valuable questioning for people in given callings, vocations. I think if you asked educators, what do you carry? They would begin at the level of what is obvious. In short order, they would begin to get down into some things they carry that they don't talk much about with others. If you ask clergy and pastoral leaders, what do you carry? They'd begin with what's obvious, but they would very soon get down below the surface, and they would share some things that you'd realize, boy, that's heavy. If you were to talk with people in crisis pregnancy care services, and you ask them, what do you carry? And they would say, up here are the things we carry as we care for men and women who are working through a pregnancy. What else do you carry? And they would get down below the surface. Ask doctors and nurses, what do you carry? And they'll say, well, obviously I do this work of patients who walk in the door. What else do you carry? And you would get down into the heavier things. I want to encourage you, as you think about this personally, to do a little exercise of simply taking a piece of paper and writing down, what is it I'm carrying these days? And give yourself enough time to really think about the question 2 and 3 and 4 levels down. If you're doing this as a team, take some time to do that individually and then share together. What is it you're carrying? And in the midst of that carrying, you also carry your purpose, you carry your vision, your mission, you carry the good work you want to do in the world, but you're carrying other things as well. And the matter of why we experience care fatigue is that we care, but we're also carriers of a lot of things. And one of the important points of learning how to navigate care fatigue goes directly to this issue of being not only aware of all we carry, but then thinking through, where do I find resources to help me with the load I'm carrying? And how do I, in fact, take some of this load and release it? And that is a conversation, I think, that is needed in concert with others, in collaboration with others, in finding good company of fellow travelers, because you all show up at your place where you work and care for others with a backpack of things you carry. And we need help with this. We need help unpacking what is there and hopefully lightening the load, but also bringing in needed resources. So this is session 3. Session 4 is going to be a session in which we're going to take time to explore together the matter of what do we do? How do we navigate through care fatigue? That's coming up in session 4.